welcome to Offsite Dirt. Today, we're diving into high performance build. My name is Mark Willie. I'm joined by Audrey Grubesic. Audrey, who's joining us today?
Well, as you can see, we have SK Collaborative. We have Carl Seville, who is a consultant, an educator, and a speaker on sustainability for residential construction. It's interesting because his vast understanding of green build, green technology has spanned lifetimes almost, it feels like, right, Carl?
Close to it, yeah.
So Carl, it's interesting when I look at your background, you've really kind of dug into this industry. You have a blog on greenbuildingadvisor.com. You practice green building principles and practices in residential construction. And then the first college textbook on green building and lead for home version number 4 reference guide. So we have the expert here, Mark.
Those articles aren't small, and lead is certainly not a small textbook. I believe I have that one as well. Marked up notes, not clearly as many notes as you would have, Carl.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time writing, mostly during the recession. I did more writing than anything else.
That's wonderful. Well, we're happy to have you here. We're going to jump in. And when we look at green and green building, we talk about workmanship and how often it is poor and resulting in bad performance with good products. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, what my current business is primarily certifying buildings. We inspect buildings for green building programs, as well as building enclosure, weather barriers and things of that sort. And we're constantly fighting to get people to literally just follow the manufacturer's instructions and meet the codes. That's about 90% of what we do is enforcing the law and enforcing, like, just competence really is what it comes down to. And it's a challenge because things tend to not be done very well. Construction industry is very competitive. They take the lowest bidder. Often the superintendents don't have enough time to actually adequately supervise and inspect the work. There's very little training. People just hire people, show up on a job and just send them to go do something. And somebody's really conscientious, they might actually read the instructions and follow it, but they tend to just do things and read the instructions later, if at all.
Yeah, it's very difficult. We totally understand that perspective. I do feel hopeful and faithful that we will start retraining, have better skill sets, and really start, like you were saying, read the books, get the education, and at least get on a webinar or something, right?
Yeah, I think there's a real lack of training, just simply because it's one of construction is one of the few professions where you don't really need any training. You need a pulse, basically. You can get a job. And good contractors spend the time training their employees. We go in and do seminars for architects and contractors on different subjects, and it makes a dent. It helps, gets things a little further along. But you really need to learn this stuff in detail. I mean, I've spent 25 years learning about this stuff, and I'm continuing to learn. So how we get everybody to really understand how to do everything right. It's a challenge. I don't necessarily see an easy path to it.
It's such a challenge, and the materials 25 years ago and the sequencing of those are so much different, right? You have many more layers in often cases, and you have certain people that, let's say someone's responsible for the sheathing, someone is responsible for the cladding, and how are they working together, right? Those are real layers. And let's say your job is to do XYZ on Thursday. Well, showing up on Thursday to do XYZ with a new product, that's like making your neighbor's grandma's favorite recipe. Like, that's not going to work so well. You need communication, and you need that hand holding, right?
Yeah, it's sequencing things properly, which people tend not to do. But one of the biggest things we see happening is, we talk about 25 years ago, even maybe about 50 years ago, before we insulated buildings and when we used solid wood for construction, buildings lasted forever. I mean, I have a back house that's about 100 years old that was never insulated in most of it, and it's held up just fine. Now that we're using composite wood products, which Joe Stieber referred to as was wood as opposed to real wood. And we're insulating, the moisture gets stuck in the walls and the stuff starts to rot. So that now we have to be really conscientious about the weather barrier, the water control in the buildings. And it just doesn't happen that much. I mean, one of the things I push people to do all the time is when you're putting your weather barrier on, don't start sheathing the building until you've got every penetration seals, every pipe, every wire, every duct. And people tend to not do that. They tend to just put the weather barrier up, put the siding up, and then the mechanical guys come through and cut holes in it. And every one of those holes is a leak. And every one of those holes is going to rot the building and degrade the performance.
Yeah, this is so good. Because when you start sealing a building, you do it with the intentionality of sealing something out, but you're making it very clear to the listeners and to the marketplace that you're also sealing something in, right?
Right.
And you better be sure of those procedures.
Yeah, I mean, buildings need to be able to dry. You know, there's this whole concept, buildings need to breathe, you know, which is not the truth. And, you know, I say buildings should be as leaky as a submarine, and then you intentionally ventilate it. But we have to be so careful about keeping them dry on top of that. I mean, you know, we went through this whole phase of tightening buildings up, and then they all started to rot. And it's like, uh-oh, we have to figure out something else. So now we realize we have to look at the weather barriers really carefully. And, you know, I think with my clients, most of my clients are multifamily developers. And in general, they're getting the insulation and the air sealing and the HVA stuff down. And the next challenge we're having is the weather barriers, is making sure we're keeping the water out. And that's become a big part of our business, is building enclosure work, where we inspect the weather barriers, we test the windows, and we find that there's just the quality that we're seeing in the interior work and the insulation air sealing hasn't gotten to the weather barrier yet on a lot of buildings. You know, so we're getting more and more clients having us inspect that and test that stuff, and trying to get training people and trying to get people to do the work correctly is still a challenge. And we're figuring out the details. I mean, I'll get details sometimes. I'll argue with an architect for a week or 2 weeks. You can't do this detail because I'll pretty much guarantee it's going to leak. You know, can we design something that will keep the water out as opposed to letting the water in?
It's interesting, you know, sorry, Mark, but when we're talking about all this, there's like all these triggers that are going off, right? So we're changing a building process to a traditional builder. We're changing a process. So when we look at the traditional general contractor bringing us through these builds, now you're bringing in all these other things, Carl, that have to be checked, and all these other things that have to be inspected, and really being aware, like you were both talking about, the sequencing. And it also triggers me because I'm in offsite construction. So yes, we are building buildings inside enclosure in factories to be able to help with that rotting or that water barrier, all those things. But I think the different process in the factory is we're not looking at all these other details after that. So we can start with a really good building and a seal, and we don't have water exposure in there, right? But now we're adding another level of industry into this process. So Carl, when you see that and you're educating people, are they starting to understand the change and what you're really requesting?
Starting to, you know, I think everybody wants to do things right, but they just don't often have the time to do it right. They're not getting paid enough to do it right. Your comment about offsite, I really like where modular construction is going. I think the idea of, you know, building something inside makes a lot of sense. It reminds me of an analogy. I think I came up with it, but other people came up with a similar one, is if we bought our cars like we bought our houses, you'd order it, they'd drop all the parts in your front yard, people would show up assembling it in the rain, probably speaking different languages, and then would you drive that car? But our houses are like that. So the idea of building the boxes in a factory, I actually saw a factory recently in South Carolina. I was very impressed with what they're doing. That solves probably 90% of the problem. But when you get on site, you need to make sure to seal the rest, you know, seal the joints really carefully, make sure that somebody's paying really close attention to making sure the enclosure is complete and intact everywhere through the building.
It's so great to hear, like, I mean, you're smiling with excitement, right? When you describe how things are working right and why they're working right. So in the world of questions, we can't ask you everything we want to ask you, but so a lot of times, decisions are made, um, and we make those decisions based on the information we have in front of us. And decisions are very commonplace for electing to use closed cell spray foam, right?
Right.
And you, of course, know many options and choices that could be done in that department. So, can you paint a picture for people on how we can approach details in other ways, and why this is a talking point?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was a big proponent of spray foam insulation when I first learned about it about 25 years ago. I was a renovation contractor at the time, and it was like, this is amazing. This makes my projects sing. And it really does. And honestly, in renovation, when you're trying to clean up an existing building, spray foam is often the most appropriate product. But particularly in new single family homes, and also in most new apartment buildings, things of that sort, when people start relying on spray foam, I believe it has become sort of an excuse for a poor design. When you have like new houses that have a million gables and vaults and things, it's difficult, if not impossible, to do a good job with that with a non-spray foam, sprayed insulation. So so people say, oh, I've got to use spray foam because it's going to cost more to use spray foam, but it's the only way the building gets done right. If you just design a building that doesn't have all these crazy shapes, you can actually get a really high performance building. I built a house for myself about 7 years ago. It's a really nice house. It's very attractive. It's in a historic neighborhood. People don't even know it's a new house. Not a lick of spray foam in it, because I designed it to not need spray foam. And it can be done, but if you want every vault and every dorm, if you want 17 dormers and 8 vaults in a building, it's going to be hard to do it without spray foam and do a good job. And the other thing we find I'm in the South, and what happens in the South particularly, everybody puts the ducts in the attic, which is not a great place for ducts. You could also design that out if you wanted to, but they won't think about designing it out. So to put the ducts in the attic, our only solution is to spray foam the roof line. And again, and the challenge is that nobody's willing to think differently and invest a little bit of time and money up front to change the way they do things in order to get a better process. I firmly believe that in all forms of construction, if they would stop doing the same thing over and over again, just step back, invest a little bit of money and time in designing something differently, they could get to a point where they get higher performance construction for little or no extra cost, probably reduced costs if they do it right, and be able to replicate that going forward. I think we currently are certifying about 180 multifamily projects all over the country. And almost every one of them is a repetitive design that somebody's done 100 times. And even the ones that are unique designs, they're not really thought out to be high performance. They're more thought out to be high design as opposed to high performance.
So I'm super excited that you're talking about multifamily, because that's one of the biggest areas that's growing in modular or volumetric construction. We're seeing panelization come in, and I love that you're talking about, I feel like it's going back to the simple process of living, right? And I love that you're talking also about design, because everything starts with the design and the pre-construction team, especially when you're talking about multifamily, being able to have a system where we can talk to developers, because really when I look at the process of multifamily, it's typically 4 or 5 buildings, right? Because if you're going to do a project, you have to make the numbers work in order to be profitable, to be able to create this type of community or this type of building type. But the smart thing, Carl, that I think is interesting is, let's design something that's duplicatable. And that's what we do in offsite construction, but let's also make it a little bit more simple so that we can be more efficient. So I see what you're doing and talking about, and I love it, because I feel like people are starting to finally listen. People are starting to finally be proactive and know that building high performance, building better, building to the capacity where we can breathe and live and have our buildings be stronger, makes it better for the whole world. Are you seeing this trend and pushing forward in the industry that you're working with, and seeing these multifamily buildings and inspecting them? Are these conversations becoming more and more prevalent at the time?
Taking the next leap and designing for high performance is still, it's a very slow process. we certify a lot of multifamily buildings, and what we're doing is we're making them better. The whole, like our whole line is behind you, is making buildings better. So we don't see a whole lot of super high performance construction in my markets. I mean, under this, some areas people are doing passive house multifamily. We have not seen any of that stuff yet. We're doing more Energy Star multifamily, primarily because the incentives are available, and they're getting better. Again, we haven't seen too many people come to us early on and say, let's figure out how to design this as well as we possibly can to get high performance. But every project we go in, we're making sure everything's done right. Everything's done better than they would have done it if we're not there. So everything is improved over us not being there, but it's a slow process to get to some really high performance construction in multifamily.
So to make the process easier, right? Your tagline, by the way, is always so welcomed and energetic for me, making buildings better, right? So if better is a stretch for people, let's start with good. So good products, right? What are they, Carl? And how can we use good products in a better way?
What's actually interesting is that there are very few bad products out there. Almost everything is the workmanship. I mean, almost all, every once in a while we see something, this stuff just doesn't work, stay away. There's certain weather barriers that we've seen a lot of problems with. We just recommend our clients stay away from them. But in general, most products are good if they're installed right. And that's the challenge, is that they're so frequently installed incorrectly that we just have to figure out a way to make sure that everything's done properly. I mean, I've been seeing sometimes, manufacturers reps come in and they do some consulting and training and inspections, and even then the stuff's still not done properly, because nobody can be there 100% of the time. I mean, nobody can afford to pay me to be on the job site 24/7 watching everything that goes in. We inspect portions of every project, and point out issues that are that need correction, and if we're lucky, they get corrected.
So being that you have this amazing blog on greenbuildingadvisor.com, what has been one of your most engaged articles, or what have you seen where people just really love what you have written, Carl, or really supported? Is there anything that comes to mind?
This goes back a while, but I once wrote an article that said, should bat insulation be outlawed? And it's quite a while ago. It's probably 10, 12 years ago, but it went totally viral. And I got a nasty letter from the vice president of the North American Insulation Manufacturers Association.
Well, good for you. It's all about us collaborating, as that's really what the name of your company, SK Collaborative, is. It's all about education and being able to have a voice. That's what's so wonderful about community. And your community is here with us, Carl. We are certainly so enthralled in what you are doing. Mark seems to find these magnificent people in high performance, and you truly are an asset for our industry. Is there anything that you'd like to celebrate in closing?
No, I just appreciate the opportunity. I look forward to seeing this posted, and we'll share it and hopefully get some more people to understand what we're doing.
Carl, thank you so much. Your insights are what the marketplace needs to learn from, and your oversight on the projects is what change our routines in the days to come. I love that interaction that you bring, the ability to view what's in front of us, interpret it, and then deliver it for better results. Well, that's making buildings better. I appreciate it so much, and thank you for being a part of High Performance Build right here on Offsite Dirt.